Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Medium's Porch. I am your host, Kathleen Boldt, and here on the Medium's Porch, we bring you the process, privilege, and power of spirit communication. We speak to mediums from all over the globe, and today we have a lovely guest with us. Her name is Tiffany Hopkins, and she is a friend and a fellow medium, and I want to talk with her today. But before I do, please know, as we are bringing this to you, we love your comments in the bottom. We want to hear from you. We can certainly come back later. If we get too talkative here and can't get to you right away, please know we'll come back later and answer your comments. So do let us know what you think and share it with friends, because we're here on the Medium's Porch to help you educate yourself, educate others, and really get a flavor for what's possible with mediumship. All right, and the perfect person to tell us more about that is Tiffany. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Kathleen. Hi, everybody.
I am so glad to have you here. Always a pleasure to talk with you. And of course, this is our first time talking in front of others, for others, and sharing some of these things that we're going to be sharing. So I'm really looking forward to our time today.
Me too. I know we both have Lilydale radio shows and we talk all the time about what it's like, and we've finally made the time to talk live. Listen.
Exactly. Yeah, Tiffany, she has been living for the last 7 years in her grandmother's cottage in Lilydale. And there's a whole story and transitional experience that she had through that, which I'm sure if we get to it, she'll be happy to share with us. Again, she has her own podcast, so you can also go there to learn more about her. She loves living. So you've told me, right, Tiffany? You love living. I feel like I'm talking about you when you're right in front of me here. It feels odd. She loves living in a forest-adjacent village, which is Lilydale. We have this beautiful forest in behind, and she has these wonderful animals, Koyo and Sylvester. I like to consider myself their aunties. They're just lovely souls, and they take advantage of the property as well. They love Lilydale as well. She travels frequently for her work, and she has been able to do this so she can increase her food options, because we know in a smaller community, it's a limited option for your palate. But she can travel the world, has traveled the world, and she gets to see friends and family while she does so. She has degrees in cognitive science, interdisciplinary computing, in the arts and music and business. And Tiffany started the organization Normalize Talking to the Dead. And she did this to create resources for the next generation of people who connect with the beyond. Her podcast is called Beyond, and it is part of this Normalized Talking to the Dead adventure. Her podcast is a heart-centered guide to new possibilities with discussions and practical tools. She is one of the many program video casts, as we've already mentioned to you, that is offered by the Lilydale Radio and the Lilydale pages, both on YouTube and Facebook. You can listen to her. I'm doing the advertisement now, Tiffany. You can listen to her every 11th and 22nd day of the month at 6 p.m. And that can be found on the page that you're now probably listening to. Whatever that is working, right? The podcast page, but the Lilydale Assembly page, the official Lilydale Assembly Facebook page, is the official mount for this program. And then you can find her on many of the other popular podcast stations. So you can follow her there so that every time there's a new episode coming up, you'll be able to have it in your stream. You can reach out to her through the podcast, making notes. Always comment. We love your comments. And you can also know that she's a spiritualist, a medium, a facilitator for learning, a podcast host, and an author. So she just keeps adding in those wonderful additions in her unfolding as a medium. And you know from watching this program, it's very important for me, but also for my medium interviewed individuals, to tell us and remind us how important that spiritual unfolding is. So her book is coming out. Beyond is its title. It's coming out June 2025, and it's going to help you with your own unfolding. So look forward to that. Tiffany, thank you for being here one more time.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So as we get started in our conversation here, I wanted to start in the same place I do with many of my mediums. And I just want to ask you, what was the call? How did you find your way to mediumship such that you felt this call to drive you and motivate you into this spiritual process?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned we might get back to the story about my house. And it really was this house that I'm sitting in right now. And you said it was my grandmother's, and it was my grandmother's, but before that it was her mother's, and before that it was her mother's. So there's been a lot of work of many, many, many people in my history to bring me to this place. And I think, I spent my 30s. I just turned 40, so this wasn't a long time ago. It's like a couple months ago. When I say my 30s, like, I mean my early 30s, I was really seeking. I'd been working in tech and had all these, exciting and fast-paced jobs, and they, as you might imagine, weren't fulfilling to my heart and soul. And so I was seeking. And I'd started reading tarot when I was in college, still just, for fun. I just thought it was interesting. I really understood it as like, I didn't see it as something psychic or anything unusual happening. I thought I just memorized what's in the cards and I just did the readings, and I was like, I'm just memorizing stuff and I'm reading it back to people. But people were like, that's really on point. And, like, I look back now and I'm like, I wonder what was actually going on there. I don't think it was just my rational brain. But I had to have this rational way in. And so I was studying tarot a little bit. I moved back to California after several years outside of the United States, and me and my two sisters and my dad all decided to do a year-long apprenticeship with a medicine woman in California. And it was studying earth-based wisdom. She was, or she is, her name is Marza Millar. She was really my first spiritual teacher. She's Celtic and Native American, Yavapai, and she had spent her whole life learning different spiritual ways. And so my family and I spent a year studying with her, and I learned all about, you know, connecting with the earth and listening to the earth and all of these gorgeous, incredible ways of seeing the world and seeing what you can't see in the world. And at the same time, I knew they weren't my traditions, so I always felt like I couldn't really dig in or take them on as my own. And so I was still seeking and still trying to find a tradition and a set of principles and tools that I could make my own and feel like I could really make them part of my life every day. I really wanted a spiritual approach to living. I wanted to be able to feel connected all the time. Um, and so I was living in Brooklyn, working in Manhattan was like a marketing director for an e-commerce company. I mean, it was a really hard job for me in terms of like commuting an hour each way in the city. Um, and I was still trying to I was learning a lot about genealogy. I was trying to practice all of my kind of spiritual tools. And I'm going to try to shorten the story a little bit, but basically, this cottage that's been in the family for 100 years was about to be repossessed. And I was like, I got a little bit of extra cash. I took this job so I could pay off student loans, and I'd done that. And I was like, let me make sure the family doesn't lose this house. And then I was like, hey, I could live in that house and not have to work this job because it'll be cheaper to live, in the country. And I always loved living in the country. So I moved here and I found mediumship. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. Thank you. Like, so
Yeah.
yeah. And so, I mean, I came here, and the rest of the story is everybody listening to this knows about Lilydale. And to be able to move here, I'd been here a couple times as a kid. My uncle lived in this house for 20 years from 1978 to 98. I came here for his wedding. I definitely spent time here, but I didn't know much about spiritualism. I didn't know anything about spiritualism. Even though my dad grew up coming here every Sunday and going to Lyceum, and I know how much it infiltrated my mind because he had a very, very open mind, but he didn't like raise us in a tradition. We weren't learning about spiritualism per se at home, but I definitely think it was in there in the way my family lives and how I was raised. And then I came here and it was just like, oh, this, okay, great. Phew. There's something for me to do.
Well, I'm sure there's many of us that are very glad that you've moved to Lilydale for sure. You have a lot that you're contributing. I want to go back to this point you said back when you were talking about your early training, your first foundational efforts with shamanism and the pagan style of education and spirituality. And I think it's very notable that you mentioned right there that you realized it wasn't your tradition. Um, I can relate to that myself because that's kind of what happened to me too. I started following those pagan and earth-based religion
Mhm.
threads, indigenous, going to powwows. I was doing a lot of that too at the beginning. So I can relate to that. And that's, I think, why it stood out. But also, I love that you were aware enough, even just awakening that process of spirituality within yourself to know that there was still something more that needed to line up for you. And I think that's where a lot of people can end up with spiritualism
Mhm.
because they didn't necessarily have a tradition other than maybe the cultural Christianity that they were raised with due to either approximation or maybe even indoctrination. But, the coming to spiritualism is gives you the opportunity for a lot of freedom of expression. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it allows you to go in and find your truth.
Mhm.
So it's not organized in a way where you are strictly within a box or a container that says, this is your doctrine, this is your creed, this is what you're supposed to do. You must rise up to this. It's for me, it's more of an understanding that this is an opportunity for us to awaken the divinity that is within us and
Mhm.
then start to cultivate, nourish, and understand what that is and sharing it with others just through our existence, right?
Mm.
By doing and being and aligning with all that is through the natural law. So, how has spiritualism changed your world since you've embarked into it? Do you have any noticeable changes there?
Oh my God, my entire life has changed. I mean, I
There we
just wrote a
go. We'll
book about
talk right from
mediumship.
that, right?
Um,
Can
I,
you pre-see it down to like just a couple things?
I mean, and it's funny because it's just it isn't what I would have picked. Like I am not I always say I'm not a religious person, and it's actually been hard for me to be like really feel comfortable saying I'm part of a religion. I mean, I live in a religious community. I can't deny that, but I just wasn't expecting it, right? And so you know, it's been really interesting to allow myself to open up to say, okay, maybe that's something I can accept and be open to. Because yeah, it was not what I was expecting, I was expecting something that was, well, I was kind of an intellectual person and kind of was okay with that. I didn't think I was gonna have to change I don't know, my way of thinking that much. And um, it's all been pretty surprising, and like, I've had to take it very slow. The kind of my philosophy around it, like learning mediumship was very fast. It was like all of a sudden I was doing it all the time. And like that was like, oh, I love it. And I love the challenge of mediumship. It is not easy. Anyone who tells you it's easy is very gifted and very lucky. I don't think it's easy. It's not been easy for me. I love that challenge, but I had to keep taking breaks and be like, what's happening here? Like my logical brain would stop me and be like, what's happening? Why is this happening? I don't know if I can accept this. Um, because it's a lot, it totally changes your perception of the world if we can talk to dead people, it's
Did you find your mind was creating scenarios that would make it possible for it to happen that
absolutely. And
went
actually,
beyond what you were being taught? Yeah.
yeah, oh, I there's a whole Well, at least there's one solid chapter in the book just dedicated to what I call conceptual frameworks, where I just outline all the different things I went through and a bunch of different ways to think about it because I needed that. And I couldn't find it. That's why I wrote the book actually, I was like, this is the book I needed when I was learning mediumship because I just really didn't have that intellectual foundation that helped me like get my mind to where it needed to go to be like, I can do this. It's okay. You know?
Right. You weren't just jumping in, oh, they say it's so, so it must be so. You were
Right.
like, oh, and what else?
Yeah,
Right. So
exactly.
those early people in your mediumship training, I know you went to Fellowships of the Spirit, did some programming there. So you would have been exposed to all of those teachers.
Yes.
But in all your journey here at the very beginning of it, who do you see as being a heavy or heavy, I mean heavy, profound, big influence on your coming to terms with all that?
Well, I have to say my first teacher was Judith Rochester, and I spent my first 3 months every week in her circle. And I mean, it just absolutely hooked me. I was totally in from the minute I started. And that was like the first week I was here. Actually, there was a big snowstorm, so we didn't have it. But the second week I was here, I was in that circle and stayed in it till I ended up having to leave for a few months for work. But um, I will, I have read so much about the history of spiritualism, and I really needed to understand the breadth of where spiritualism came from. I also have another big chapter about the history of spiritualism because for me, the history really helped me. And then a lot of I have been part of the morbid anatomy community for since like 2020, I guess. And taking a lot of classes with different intellectuals and philosophers and stuff like that. So basically what I've like to do is take like people's understanding outside of our world, outside of spiritualism, outside of Lilydale, who
Mhm.
explain certain things, and then take what my teachers like Judith and Elaine, what they taught me and kind of bring it together. Like I needed both of those sides. And so for me, it's always been this kind of bouncing back and forth between like, and maybe it's three sides, like the history, the kind of science and stuff that's going on outside of spiritualism, and then these incredible masters of mediumship that we have here in Lilydale, and getting to not just watch it every day, but live around it. And that's what Normalized Talking to the Dead is about, is because for me, this never would have happened if somebody hadn't put me here
Right.
and surrounded me with people who are like, it's okay, just try it, you know?
Well, when you talk to these, like you said, masters, when I've talked to people that have been what I would consider master teachers or people that have influenced me, they all seem to come down to that same point that they have, after years and years of teaching, recognized and through their own personal experience, that mediumship is a faculty that belongs to each of us, like a birthright. It is our ability to communicate with love, with divinity, with those who love us when they return their state to their original state, that of spirit. So it's beautiful when you see that repeated through teacher after teacher, generation after generation, because that's the thread that connects it all together. What I love about what you're doing is you're almost taking us back to those days at the beginning of spiritualism when people were looking at all sides of the equation. Look at all the testing in the history of spiritualism that was done on mediums, to help those that were trying to, put it into a framework that was more comprehensive and more complete in the physical world as an understanding of what exactly is happening. And then you get the others that are just the strong mediums and they have no idea what's happening. But the two were playing off of each other right from the beginning. So I love that you're kind of bringing this around again to the fact that, hey, let's look at all sides of this. There's not just one way there. There's not just one way to use mediumship. There's not just one way to see it or understand how it happens. And I love that in your own process, you start to understand what works for you. But before you got to that place, and before you decided that, you didn't make it a destination, right? You did this journeying around it. And obviously you're the curious type. You've traveled the world, you have interest in variety of senses and foods and experiences. So obviously you're giving us another good example of how this is where you are now. This is the book that you're publishing now. This is what you needed then. This is what you want to share with others. And later, let's see what's next. Right? So I love
Yeah.
that about you, because one of the questions I do want to ask you, I mean, there's so many that I want to ask you, but one of them, in this process of research and in this process of looking at history, looking forward, looking back, being present, have you had any moments where you wondered or prospected maybe, or not prophesied, but just kind of looked forward, like, where is mediumship going? Just as a large process, because obviously for you it's important to reach out to others beyond the religion itself. So where have you conceived this may be taking us all?
I also I end the book with a little tiny chapter about my concept of the future of mediumship.
Well, we don't want to do a spoiler alert here.
Oh,
So
it's fine. I can't keep secrets. Like that, present secrets. I always give people their presents as soon as I get them for them. I
oh, me
hate.
too.
So, uh, what you were talking about earlier really got me thinking about this thing that my conclusion, if I could say so, as of yet, with my research and practicum, if you will, with mediumship, is that if we can do this to talk to the dead, I don't know why we would limit ourselves when there's so many other things that are hard to communicate with. And spiritualism did something like I mean, it was sneaky because spiritualism is like you have to do spiritual healing as well as mediumship. And that was really hard for me. I was like, I don't want to do healing. I don't want to do hands-on healing. I don't get it. Like I just couldn't get it, right? But I mean, at least in fellowships and then in church, when we go to church, we do healing, right? And so I've been very exposed to spending time with the energies of the body. And I'm not a very embodied person, or I wasn't, I should say. And I realized through all of that mediumship allowed me to speak to my body and to understand my body. And I was just like, I've had a lot of health issues the last decade or so, maybe more. I was kind of a sickly kid too, but um I always was like what are you doing? Tell me. Like what's happening in here? I can't understand what you need. And I really feel like mediumship gave me the ability to speak to my body. And it's very similar to me to speaking to the dead in that it's not a conversation like we're having, right? It's complicated. It's sensations, it's emotions, it's little subtle tips and tricks and things that come and go. And, it's not this clear-cut conversation like I'd hoped it'd be. But mediumship works for me to communicate with my body. And because of my history, especially with the earth-based culture and earth-based wisdoms learned about, I also noticed it works with communicating with animals and it works with communicating with nature. And, I find it has so many applications that we need right now in our world. I think we need to reconnect with nature. We need to I should say I needed to reconnect with nature. I needed to reconnect with my body, and I don't think I'm alone in that. And I also think we have a lot of kind of wild frontiers happening right now, especially in extraterrestrial life, in AI, in these worlds that we don't understand. And I think more people understanding mediumship could help us navigate that terrain as other frontiers, like death, that we don't understand and that we can't necessarily see or communicate with in the same way as you and I can communicate. So those are some things that I'm into.
I love it. I love that. Very expansive and inspiring to know that there are places to take this, for especially for the people listening that are relating to this, not only relating to the fact that they may be more thought driven, mental processors as opposed to embodied, but also for those that were thinking about doing mediumship or healing. Like you said,
Right.
you don't have to be a healer to do mediumship. It just so happens that spiritualism started with training you to be a healer before you ever
And
got to be a medium.
I have to say now I 100% like think you do need to be a healer to be a medium, but I didn't get that before. So I'm very grateful that I've, you know, somebody was like, "Yeah, you gotta." And I was like, "Fine."
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to get more favorable results because you're connecting to a very important aspect of what we're doing as mediums, communicating and bringing healing information on the vibration of the communication of words. Um, but I fully know that you don't have to be a spiritualist to be a medium, and some people are mediums without realizing they're a healer. So, there's variances there. What I would say though is that I love that you're presenting a relatable equation for people. That,
Mm.
you know what, I don't have to sit down and talk to somebody for a half an hour and do that multiple times a week in order to be considering that I can use this tool of mediumship. I don't have to be standing up in front of an audience and giving a mediumship demonstration for the same reasons, like in order to access this gift. Now,
Yeah.
in the definition of the gift, I know you and I have talked a little bit about this. You use the word mediumship in places I probably wouldn't have used it if I'm understanding you correctly. So you're talking about your body and tuning into your body. Tell me if I'm correct here. Tuning into your body, being aware and having a conversation with your body, a communication with your body. But my understanding of mediumship is that I'm talking to a spirit energy, an energy that I don't define or identify as my own energy field. So I make that differentiation with mediumship. It sounds like you make a different differentiation. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is spirit communication
Yes.
and mediumship. I mean, if you look at the word,
Mm-hmm.
right, a medium is just in between. And if we're talking about the skill of being in between, it would be it's not in the word. It isn't. I know our culture at this point has mostly defined it as spirit communication, but the word itself doesn't imply anything about a spirit, right? It just is saying that you are the practice and you are embodying, perhaps, I don't want to overuse the word, but a place between two, and you are serving as a tool to allow those two to communicate, to connect. Just like a medium is also, pen and paper, or, we use it for the media as well, right? The plural of medium. So
Right.
as a way for us to,
Nature, the person in the middle, right? It must be a
yeah,
Latin base of some sort there that connects
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. So I know it's like it's an expansion of the definition. Um, but I don't know. It's for me, that's what I've used it for
Yeah.
in my own life. And the thing that I did actually even before I really totally understood the connection I had with my body or with earth or animals, is with art and how mediumship can be almost synonymous with creativity.
Mm.
Um, as an act of expressing something into the world. And in some ways that's you know, like a manifestation is a similar word in terms of taking something kind of unseen and making it seen.
Well, we have talked about with other mediums that have come on the program. We've talked about how artists and mediums can have that similarity, because I think it goes back to that point you're making, that you can use the word mediumship for connecting with your body because you are an intermediary. You're in the middle of a process of energy flow and energy movement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you're putting yourself in a state where you're being the, as much as possible, the neutral observer of that flow of energy. So you can take information out of it. You can put information forward by disseminating that information. But in either case, to receive the information, you're in this state of mind that is more neutral, that has a frequency to it that is an altered state of its own kind,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So I feel like this idea of creativity is wonderful. And as you know from doing mediumship, the language, right? The language, the way the information comes to us can be very abstract, right? And
Yes.
sometimes when we share that language with our sitters, or in the case of a friend or whatever healer situation you're in, they can be confused by it because their mind doesn't process things abstractly or through metaphor, visuals, or left brain think or right brain thinking. Now, again, there's no such thing as left brain, right brain. We can get into that, but we like to use those categories to get to the point quicker, or at least I do.
I do too.
So tell me a little bit about your mediumship process into that realm of how you go into that state, or what it is in that state you can identify to explain it to someone else. And by the way, before you do that, I'm so excited about what we're talking about. So listeners, if you got a minute here, tell us what you're thinking about some of this, because we're talking to you about what you are capable of. And I'm sure we're both curious, are you, Tiffany, to know, like,
Oh,
what
absolutely.
is it you guys are feeling about these things that we're talking about? So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your process, if you would. I'm
Yeah.
excited to
I
hear.
mean, it's really interesting. The words we use are something I've spent a lot of time thinking about and researching. And when I first started writing about mediumship for creativity in particular, was because I was studying channeling, and I thought it was a great word for it. And then I realized channeling is one direction. And I just couldn't keep using that word because I want to have a conversation, right? I want it to be two directions. I want it to have, I want to be in between and not just a vessel. I mean, channeling is great and being a vessel is wonderful. But I'm really into the connecting, the communication, the kind of bi-directional thing. And so,
Just to clarify,
sure.
energies, information is coming to you're letting the information come through you and out to someone else, but you're not expecting them to answer, and you're not engaged in the communication as it comes through. Is
Right. That's
that
how I
right?
would consider
Okay.
channeling, right? And it's like that you're getting information out and you're kind of a vessel for some other a spirit or a being or a guide or something like that. But you don't kind of it's not considered part of the process to go back and be like, "Hey, what about this thing?" Right? And that's a big part of mediumship, right? When you're doing a reading for somebody, you got to go back and be like, hey, spirit, you got to help me out here. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. And so that part of it, I always was really captivated by, and how spiritualism and the way I was trained in mediumship was really focused on the importance of that communication with spirit and not just, you know, letting all this stuff come out for the sitter. It's like we also come back and talk to spirit. And that was like kind of revelatory for me. Like that wasn't something I totally understood in terms of creativity or spirit or anything like that. But that was very much how I was taught to communicate with nature and natural beings and the directions and everything that I learned from Marza in my early days. Everything was about co-creation. And you always asked for information and clarity, and it was always a conversation. And so when that showed up in mediumship, I was like, ah, okay. Like I feel good about this because I feel good about that's how I want to interact with living humans, so that's how I want to interact with everybody. You know, I want it to always be a dialogue. So back to your question was about my process, and I love that question because I'm a big process person, and really the this whole book was just so I can write out the process. Like my day job is really about
Yeah.
processes and my brain works in processes. And so, I mean, like I have a very clear, cut and dry, step-by-step process. And that's also how I ended up being like, this could really be used for a lot more than just spirit communication because you can kind of fill in the blank here. And in order to do that, I had to introduce a lot of additional language. For example, instead of just spirit, I would say a contact. So when I open up a connection, I'm choosing a contact, and that could be a spirit, but it could be my body or just a part of my body or my cat who's wandering around here probably causing trouble. Um, and so I kind of start with asking a contact, if they want to have a conversation. And that's sort of how it all begins for me, just like with any other mediumship process, I think. Um, and then I like to think of a lot of the in between as an interview, right, with the contact. And because that's like, I mean, I just kind of talked about that a little bit, but then my other thing that I'm really into is making sure everything's closed at the end. So I have a big part of my process is about remembering to close the connection, and then bring myself fully within the bounds of my skin. Um, and that's a big safety thing for me of,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really important. Um, I learned the hard way at the beginning.
Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I left myself open, and you get exhausted. You take on other people's physical impressions to the point where you're feeling the actual pain,
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way that shouldn't be touching you in that way. You can
Right.
become aware of someone's pain. You can be aware of where that is and be highly sensitized to that, but you don't want to be taking that energy into your field as if it's your own and identifying with it, claiming it as your own. And in
Right.
the early days, I didn't understand that, but I learned it pretty quickly. I had Elaine and Thomas Kratzley as my foundational teachers in the fellowships, and along with the other teachers that came through. I mean, they made it very clear about ethics and foundational use of your energy. So that was very helpful.
Yeah. I
Important.
wish I could say I'm done learning that. I think for me, so far, it's been a lifelong practice. I think, and something I didn't realize is, I mean, I don't know how to say this, like another reason I think mediumship is a lot more than just spirit communication is because as I've started doing it, I've recognized I've been doing this my whole life. And it was very much how I lived and how I survived and how I interacted with the world. And so it's been very hard for me to learn to turn it off. And that's also, I think, why it's been so important for me is like, A, connecting with my body, which I didn't know how to do, and B, learning boundaries because I also just didn't, it's very hard for me to remember basically. Because it wasn't how I don't know, formed. You know what I
Right.
mean?
And if you're exactly, because if you're taught a certain way of coping with
Yes.
situations in your life when you're a young kid, you're going to use those, whether the strategies work or not, you're going to use those when they come up again. And then when they come up again, they may not also work very well then either, but it's human nature to keep using them because they're the ones you came up with.
That's right.
So, it can be a while to unlearn those strategies. I mean, this comes up a lot, as you would know, with empaths, right? When we use the word
Yes,
empath, I know it's become
exactly.
a very stigmatic word in the world right now. Lots of people overusing it. That idea that, you are too open, you're too
Right.
allowing too much to cross into your sphere of influence, is what I like to call that. This is my jurisdiction. This is my area where I have the right to say, I need this, I don't need this, I can make this decision, I have sovereignty here. And this area of sovereignty, I also, if we just go back to spiritualism supports that we can have our own sovereignty, right?
Yes.
We can take
Yes.
responsibility. And I know responsibility is important for your book and what you talk about in mediumship, being
Yep.
responsible with your energy. So not just managing your own energy, but being responsible with how your energy goes out into the world. And,
Yes. There's a chapter about that
safety.
too, being a responsible medium. It's
Yeah,
very,
yeah,
it's really important for everybody.
yeah, absolutely.
And you kind of remind me of, you know, what we were talking about a few minutes ago, just in learning those boundaries and why, I don't know, the everybody kind of um should learn mediumship maybe. I mean, I don't want to be too much of a to push it too much on people, but like it's such a valuable skill for us to be able to do this sort of connecting. And you bring up the point that you had asked before about what is one of the big things I learned from spiritualism when I first came, and that was actually a very life-changing experience to for somebody to say to me, and actually it was many people because it's common, it's a very foundational thing that's taught in spiritualism is this is our world and we get to say what happens. And if we're not comfortable, you say no, and you're not willing to speak to, you know, if I remember when I first got here, I was worried I was going to get spooked in my house and be scared. And someone was like, "Oh, just tell them not to come in." And I was like, uh, wait, I can do that? And I did. And they never bothered me. You know,
Yeah.
like I said, I don't want to be scared. I'm happy for everybody, you know, other people to come in, but don't scare me. And they didn't. So,
Well, I probably told you how, I had that experience where they wake you up. Have you had that
yes,
experience?
I
Yeah.
haven't, but well, actually, yeah, that's not true. I have, but
Yeah. But I had to do that too. I'm like, these four corners, outside that, fine. You can come to me through my mind and my dreams,
mm,
right? But you
yep.
cannot touch me while I'm in bed.
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
boundaries
So
with
that
the
was
women
my
in the
boundary.
bed.
It's like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah,
It's just too shocking. It's
it is.
too yeah, it's just too challenging to be in a state that's in the deep state and then bring yourself up through those layers of frequency coming back to alert state, right? Your beta
Mhm.
mind, and not know, like along the way you're okay with them touching, but when you hit that beta mind, it's like somebody's, it's just automatic. You're programmed to understand that there wouldn't be someone in your room. So, it's just too jolting. It's too stressful. So yeah, you do need boundaries for a lot of different reasons. And I'm sure people that are still exploring that will learn a lot from what you're offering them in the book, the techniques, the practices. One thing I love that you bring up a lot is using the word practice mediumship, like the mediumship practice. And I don't hear a lot of people say that. And I really value that because it brings us home to what you can see from the beginning of our conversation here, that you're a person who's curious and growing and no longer maybe seeking in the same way, but definitely exploring, right? Being creative, going beyond the boundaries, pushing your boundaries and pushing that envelope of what everybody else is calling truth. So that practice of mediumship, I think, is fabulous. It also brings it into the realm of giving us something that holds us as mediums solid and sound in ourselves as we go through life. So beautiful, beautiful. No question in that. I just wanted to talk about that part. So now you have one of the things you're going to be doing in your book, and I know you've done a ton of research on, is the nervous system state.
Oh, yes.
And you're going to be talking in your book a little bit about how to know when you're there in a certain state, right? How to work through that state and how to change that state. So, really, you're talking a lot about managing your own state. Can you
That's right.
tell us a little bit either about the research, your process in uncovering that, what you've learned, what you want to share? Take that anywhere you would like to. I'd be happy to hear more.
So that's within the being a responsible medium chapter,
Okay.
actually. And the reason that's the case is because our nervous system and the state we are in is not part of our control, right? We can't choose our nervous system state. It is decided by our body and our mind based on our environment, and our internal just physiology, right? So if we are afraid or calm and connected, if we are in freeze or flight or fight or any of the various nervous system states, that is because our body thinks we need to be there and our mind thinks we need to be there, and we can't actively change that. And so the reason it was such an important thing in the book is because for people who are struggling to be able to connect, whether that shows up in not feeling creative or not, or struggling in personal relationships, that is typically because we're not in the right nervous system state to be able to create or connect with others. And if we aren't in that state to connect with a living human, how are we going to do it with a spirit? Right? So I spent a lot of time talking about it, which was really hard because I'm not a research scientist in this field. And so it was hard to be able to put enough in there that wasn't And the research doesn't talk about mediumship. So let me just say that nobody in the neuroscience community is talking about how to manage your nervous system state for mediumship. So I was really trying to extend our understanding so that those of us who want to find a calm and connected state for mediumship would have enough understanding of why why meditation, why can't I meditate today? Why do I feel like this is impossible? And that might be because there's something going on either in your physical environment or your internal physiology that just says, hey, I can't do this right now. And for me, it was really important to know that isn't something I'm making a decision about. This is something my body is actually telling me. And if I want to change that state, I'm not going to do it by saying, Tiff, no, you're meditating. I don't care what you say. No, I have to change it by, checking. Maybe I'm too tired. Maybe I'm too hungry. Maybe I haven't seen enough other people today. Maybe there's a high-pitched noise that I can't even hear that's just throwing me off, right? Like there's just a lot going on that we don't know about. And so that's why I put a lot of that in there. That is like the tiniest bit. And I would say, most of what I've put in the book and what I've researched is based on the polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. And so it is also, I should say it's a theory. It isn't all like, it's been around for 50 and 60 or 60 since the 60s, which I guess would be 60 years. And it has been borne out across research and clinicians. Like it's very well established, but we don't exactly know what's going on. So, it will change, our understanding will change, but I found it so valuable to get at least a little bit of understanding of what's happening in my body, and why, you know, sometimes it's harder than others, right?
I would like to add an experience I've had more than once, and it does point to what you're saying in the experience of it. And at a distance, we do know as spiritualists, healing and energy can go a distance, that we're all connected in some way energetically to each other, whether we're known or unknown, and that concentration can vary. I had the experience of at my father's passing. I was in Toronto, Ontario, and he was in Niagara. So we're talking about an hour and a half drive away. And yes, he's very close to me. So, of course, there's going to be connectivity and energy. But I had very strange experiences that day that he went into his attack and into his coma. Wow. And I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea what it was. Now, is this intuitive? Yes, of course it's intuitive, but it's energetic, because there was this energetic feeling, and I had in my head, the sky is falling, the sky is falling by Chicken Little. It was a terrible day. The clouds were low. The Toronto towers were buried in the clouds. So somehow the sky is falling became my momentary mantra. But I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I had that first experience and then later found out what it was. Now, back to 2022, one of my mentor teachers transitioned into spirit. And I woke up that morning and I had already done a half a season of readings in Lilydale at that point. I was registered medium there. And I got up and I had appointments scheduled. I had a fabulous day the day before, tons of energy, everybody was in a great place. They were happy with their readings. There was transitional and healing going on. I mean, it was like one of my best days of the summer. The next morning I woke up and I couldn't function. It made no sense. And like you said, the nervous state, right? The nervous state wasn't where it needed to be. I found out, and it went on, and I had to have two people that I just said, listen, I can't do this today. I have to let you go. I can't even pinpoint what it is. You can reschedule me if you want, but today this isn't going to happen. So I ended up canceling. I ended up doing one person later in the afternoon when I felt better. So there was a shift between morning and afternoon. And I got a message late afternoon telling me that one of my mentors, who had been a huge influence on my mediumship, she had passed away in the morning. And it had affected me in a way, like you said, you can't control, you don't know what's affecting your nervous system sometimes. It's
Mhm.
not just always your conscious mind thinking something or your belief system subconsciously that's
Right.
influencing. It can be something purely energetic that's affecting you from around the world. And she was over in England. So, this something shifted there in the afternoon when I became more balanced with it. But I woke up just feeling like the world had fallen in. And I remember saying, this feels like when my dad passed, but I didn't know what it was.
Wow.
So, yeah, as a medium, we have to be responsible with our own energy and when we're ready and not ready. Mhm.
Yeah. And it's you're reminding me that sometimes I forget that, especially here, we're probably talking to people who already are familiar with what I'm talking about. And I am often coming from a standpoint of talking to people who aren't familiar with mediumship, haven't experienced it, aren't spiritualists, and don't have a way to explain things. And so, you probably you just gave a perfect example. We all sort of know that's the truth, right? We know we are affected by energy and by what's around us. And basically what I'm saying is science is now proving it. Here's some here's some research, right?
Catching up.
And here's how we can use it, right? Because our spiritualist teachers have been saying this for 150 years, right? And now psychologists are saying it as well. And I think that this merging of what we've known for a long time, speaking with from the spiritualist we, and what science is able to prove or show from a rational perspective, like this research shows why our brains change how we feel based on the people we're around. It's like, yeah, it's all coming together. See?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you and I had talked at the beginning about how there's variances even in our podcasting programs, right? So if I'm interviewing one person, it's kind of pulling a different quality of communication out of me based on the energy exchange between the two of us. And
Mhm.
so if somebody were to go back and survey, they would see some variance, right?
Mhm.
Because of the energy differences. Yeah. So beautiful. Now you have done a lot of work with technology. You've got your research, you're thinking outside of the box. Do you see technology as anything that's going to help us progress with our mediumship? I
It's
mean,
a
you
great
mentioned
question.
AI earlier, but what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
I mean, I should say I haven't quite gotten back to that. I think that's sort of something I needed to get a better foundation of, my body, like the things we've been talking about.
Sure.
But my entire life, I've been obsessed with computers and my, you know, it was what I studied in school. It's been my entire career. And I understand very deeply how they work and how AI works. And I've just sort of been letting it simmer. So I feel like like, I haven't kind of allowed myself to dive down that rabbit hole because um, I've wanted to stay away from it for a little while. Like this was all me getting away from technology in a way, away from the computer and like back to my body and nature and spirit. But I'm feeling ready to get back into it again. And so let me answer that one and ask me again in a year.
Okay. Because I know there's room for speculation. I mean, EVP has been used in the past by people, etc. And now with AI, I'd be curious to let our minds wander on that sometimes to see how
Yeah,
spirit can influence that with us. But then
absolutely.
again, we come up probably with the same problems and not problems, but issues around some people needing proof of things.
Yeah.
But again, that's another discussion. So we've got lots of room for that in the future to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason I think it's so interesting and why it will be a thing, or it is a thing, I should say, is because as we know with EVP, there's been a lot of parapsychology research about the ability for the mind to affect like for example, there's a great study on using the mind to affect a candle flame versus a light bulb, and so I'm going to speak not in technical terms. There's space in technology and in AI for spirit or the mind or consciousness or God or whatever you want to call it to put its hands in there.
Yeah.
And especially because AI is meant to figure itself out. That basically is saying, is it figuring itself out? Is spirit figuring it out? Are we affecting it without knowing it? Or, so there's a lot there. That's why I'm like,
Yeah, when you use AI, it is rather uncanny how quickly the information comes back, and also how some things are put in there that you didn't plan to have put in there. Now that could be mind patterning and conditioning based on, how they've programmed it. But there is some interesting room there, like you said, space to see where that all falls into place. I mean, look at we can influence electronics ourselves. I mean, when I was in art school and I had to do graphics on the computer, sometimes I just get so frustrated with the technology that I would end up making it so my computer couldn't even do what I wanted it to do.
right.
And my grandmother, back in the day, she used to make watches not work just by her regular energy field. She just couldn't wear watches, right? So yeah, there's lots of room for experimentation and speculation.
That's right. A
Yeah.
lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, for those that are listening and are mediums themselves, I think it's always interesting to hear, we all have our inner critic, but as a medium going out there, we have to let that go, right? We're there for the spirit person. We're working for spirit. And so we have to put our critic aside, put our judgment aside. We have to get as neutral as possible and be a mediator in the middle of it all, be neutral. But when we watch other mediums, sometimes we can perceive as mediums that they're not necessarily succeeding at that. And, we're all guilty of it at some point because of, like you said, differences in our neural system, what's happening that day, our state of mind. There could be any factor that influences that. So my question is for you, as a sitter, being a medium, how would you, watching other mediums, recognize your most ideal circumstance for receiving and watching and observing a good medium in operation? Like, what are some of the things that are so valued by you that if you saw another medium doing it, you say, aha, I could go to that person for a reading, or they're doing a good job? Not that it's our job to put others down or compare or do this thing, but I'd love to hear from the inside out, if possible, how you yourself, since you give so much thought to these things,
Mm-hmm.
what are the main things that you would look for and we can all aspire to be within ourselves, to be productive and healing and supportive and doing our best work for spirit?
I love this question. And I honestly don't feel like I've ever thought about it. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons I really struggle with being a professional medium, because it's something I really go back and forth about. That's one of the reasons I used the term practicing medium, and not professional, because, and maybe that's because I haven't sat and envisioned what I think I really want a medium to be like. That being said, I the first thing that comes to mind is authenticity. And like, do I feel like I'm talking to a real person? Right.
Mm.
And, you know, mediumship is hard. I've said this already, we've gone through this, and there's a there's this in the book, I go through the foundations of improvisation that a scientist kind of rooted out and listed. And I think it's fascinating because it lists all these things that are, I mean, it's exactly what we need for mediumship, because we're improvising, right? And one of the things it talks about is um, you need like this sort of scaffolding of common language, and you need like in improvisation, if you think of comedy, they have like bits, right? They'll have a specific uh like joke they tell, or type of joke. And that's really important because you need to have some continuity, and you need to have some tools for the process of doing a performance while you're practicing, right? That's one of the things he says in this book. You have to practice while you're performing. There's no separation because you don't get to plan ahead. And
It's totally
so,
true.
Right?
Yes. Yeah,
It's
totally.
absolutely, it's so well
It's
put. And I know we don't like
live.
to, yes, it's live. I know we don't like
Yeah.
to say that mediumship is a performance, and I don't mean it as in
No.
like a play, or entertainment, but it is something it's an act we're performing for another person. So I always like to say that. But so what I'm saying is, I think we can get into habits as regular people and start to have, we talked a little bit about like, coping mechanisms, and we also start to have biases, that we learn. I mean, we don't start to, we all have them, and they're in there in how we function. And we start to do things kind of rote. And I think the mediums that really strike me are the ones that are more um free, I guess, and don't have as quite as tight of rules, and maybe things are a little less, they're a little more wild, and you're kind of like, where are they going with this? And it's what's going to happen next? There's a limit, because we don't want things to be too far, out of the box. And that's another thing the scientist says about improvisation is like, there's a box. Like, you have to be able to stay within a certain set of parameters, but sort of put a new lens on it, right? So it's all about combining what everybody's comfortable with what everybody is uncomfortable with, in a way that balances those two things, to provide new things,
Love that.
new
Yes.
information. And so I think it's so hard to do this work, and I don't want to say stay authentic, because it's not it's not that people are inauthentic, it's that it's really hard to do, and it takes so much effort that I find myself in readings like I have these like lines that I say, and they just come out of nowhere, and I'm like, wait a minute, why did I say that every time? Like, why does this, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's
Yeah,
it
well,
in
I want to ask you this because you're saying it's an effort, but I feel like what you're saying is not so much, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not communicating with spirit that is the effortful part. It's you trusting that communication, knowing you're not going to know ahead of time, not going to be in control, and those words will come through, and you may not even know why or what.
right.
So
Well,
I believe the effort is getting out of your own way. That is the effort. And am I on track with what you're
oh,
saying?
absolutely. And I can take it one step further and to say the effort for me is around the living person and the living people.
Okay.
The spirit side's easy. The spirit side's great, right? It's being in front of another person and saying things and being able to speak to them in a way that is number one, first and foremost, not harmful, no matter what, right? And that's really hard. And so that was like a lot of me rambling about like how I do like mediumship readings that kind of surprise me. And when a reader, or a medium, I should say, is kind of shares what's happening a little bit, not too much, right? It's such a fine line, but
It is.
that's something I really treasure when I see.
So it wouldn't be pleasing for you to listen to a medium that you've heard maybe a few times saying the same phrases and the same words and having the same patterns. And what would that point to if you saw that? What would you feel? How would they be able to improve themselves if they were doing that, do you think?
Thinking about that, because I'm thinking about what I have done. For me, it goes back to what you pointed out exactly, is for me to solve that problem, I have to take a step back, take like literally in the moment, take a breath and get out of my own way a little bit and let what's coming come out and not me, right?
Oh,
Because
if you were
spirit,
in that position, if you were
yeah,
starting to do that, I see. Yeah. If
yeah,
you were, yeah.
yeah. Because it's a trust thing. And I think we just um yeah, kind of have to constantly reinvent ourselves and how we're doing things so that we can keep expanding and keep moving forward and
Would
more.
you say that a lot of mediumship is about listening?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Mostly, you know,
Right.
it's mostly listening. Absolutely.
Because, yeah, I was just wondering where you would take that question about watching someone repeat,
Hmm.
and, fall into their own habits and patterns in a way that it's worked before, I'll do it again.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel your word authenticity comes in, because
Yeah.
I feel from what you're explaining to me, if I'm understanding this, I'm getting a sense that your understanding of authenticity is also about being present and listening deeply
Yes.
to
And
what
I just
matters in the
realized
moment.
authenticity has a totally different meaning in context of mediumship around, is it real, like with real spirit? And I didn't mean that at all.
It's like authenticity with the present
With the
moment and
person.
yourself. This is
Yes.
what's happening right now.
Yes.
And I'm getting this information that I'm listening deeply to
Yes.
and conveying.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a loaded word. I didn't even think about that I used that.
It's
Yeah. I did
it's
not
great
mean
though. I think it's an important word when
Yeah.
it's in the context of the moment in practice and the dissemination of the information to others. And I do agree with you, the hard thing is the client, not that they're being hard on us or anything.
No. No, they're
It's
usually
but it's what's
wonderful.
happening in our head. It's hard because we're listening to that spirit, the spirit, all of our spirit is listening to spirit, and we're bringing it forward for someone. It's hard sometimes to not to want to please your client.
Yes.
So that's where you got to get out of your own way. But it's also important, and it's also important that when they receive it, it's not our job to make sure they understand, because if we're
Absolutely.
trusting spirit and we've been authentic and present for the practice, and everything's in perfect neurological place, energetically, everything, that perfect idyllic reading, which isn't always consistent, right? But if we're in that perfect place, then that person will completely understand, because there's a need there, because spirit is your moving spirit through you in a way where that person can receive it, because spirit's the intelligence that knows, right? They're the
Right.
ones that know. Sorry, you're getting me so excited. I'm telling my own story, but we're here to talk to you.
No, I mean, it's exactly this is a conversation, and that's why I love talking about it with you. So
So, listeners, we're so glad that you're part of this and gave us the opportunity to have this conversation. We talk about a lot of things, you and I, Tiffany, when we see each other outside this context, but this has been dynamite. This has been fabulous. Is there anything that you want to share with others, either about your book, what's coming up for you, or just blessings you want to share with the listeners as we start to
yes,
wrap up here?
I do. I just got a pre-order link for the book just
Ooh.
like today. So I would love to share that with everybody. And pre-orders are really important if you're interested in the book or know someone who might be to put in a pre-order for it. Um, it's not easy to get a mediumship book published out there. People are really consider this to be a niche in a small world, and to, you know, the more people who are interested early on, the more it helps build momentum and helps my publisher know that people really want this. And so we can get it out there into the wider bookstore world. So I would love anybody who's interested to take a look at that link and put in an order if you want to. And then next summer, in the summer season, I've got 3 classes during the Lilydale Assembly season, and you'll see that stuff in the program. It'll be on the Lilydale website. So I really hope that some of you will join me. And I have a class about in my kind of approach to mediumship for creativity, a class I'm doing with a friend, Joanna Ebenstein, about art and mediumship, and a book signing, sort of like telling a little bit of story about the book, which we'll do as well. You can also go to normalizetalkingtothedead.com and sign up for the email list, and you'll get all kinds of information about that. So yeah, I'd love to hear more from anyone listening, and I really appreciate you, Kathleen, and taking the time and asking me these amazing questions and having this kind of expansive conversation. It means a lot to me, so thank you.
It's been a pleasure. So,
And you asked
listeners,
for blessings. We should send out some blessings.
some blessings. Yes, yes.
Yes,
There's a big world out there.
it is.
Ah. Let's do a prayer. Would
Okay.
you like to do the prayer?
Sure, I could do that.
Okay.
So just take a moment to connect with all of the people who are listening to this. I'm starting with you, Kathleen, and then all of the people throughout all of time who take the moment to listen and to connect with us and to hear our words and to share them out into the world. And as we all collectively expand ourselves and think about what we are capable of beyond maybe what we've been told we can do, that we start to build energy in this world for all of our highest and best and start to expand, especially the presence of love and connection among all the living beings throughout this world and any others. So with that, thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Mhm.
Be well, everyone. Join us again soon. Bye.